Good afternoon. Welcome to Leadership Series 2010. This is our third presentation and a very exciting one. I'm glad you all were able to come today. The title is They Were Just People, and it's really about everyday people who chose to put themselves at peril and become leaders and step forward at a difficult time. Our speakers for today are Rabbi Cukierkorn, and you've got a very long kind of biography that I don't want to read to you. And the second speaker they're going to present together is Mr. Bill Tammeus, and he has a sort of a legendary career as a journalist in town. And I see he went to the University of Missouri. I wasn't going to say that. But Midwest takes basketball very seriously and sports very seriously. I know you don't want to hear me, you want to hear them. So they're going to present together and talk about some of the people that were just people. So here they are.
Thank you, Bob, and thanks for that kind introduction. And speaking of leadership, welcome on this, the 64th anniversary of Winston Churchill's famous Iron Curtain speech down the road in Fulton, Missouri.
And although we're not here to talk about Churchill, he did say something about leadership that we think you might want to remember. A leader, Churchill said, needs the ability to foretell what is going to happen tomorrow, next week, next month, and next year, and to have the ability afterwards to explain why it didn't happen.
That sounds like the work of a newspaper columnist, too, actually. Well, Rabbi Jacuques and I want to use our time here today to talk to you about some of the lessons from our book, They Were Just People, Stories of Rescue in Poland During the Holocaust, and to focus especially on what the people in the book can teach us about being leaders and making tough decisions.
One of the first lessons seems so obvious, but it's really not. It's to be grateful for memory, which of course is always a combination of both blessing and curse. But without memory, we are utterly lost.
Indeed, wise leaders cultivate and cherish institutional memory so that they don't wind up repeating mistakes of the past.
Memory binds people together, and in Jewish tradition, memory is crucial. Throughout the Hebrew Scriptures, the people of Israel are told again and again the stories of God's role in their lives, especially the Exodus story, which shows that God is the rescuer, the redeemer of God's people.
In the Christian tradition, too, which is firmly rooted in Judaism's respect for memory, the role that memory plays is crucial. One small example, at the Last Supper, Jesus broke bread and shared wine and said, "Do this in remembrance of me." And so we Christians do that in the sacrament of Holy Communion.
One of the great joys of doing the research of the book Bill and I have written is knowing that we have preserved important memories of a dark time in history, memories that simply must not be forgotten.
What a wonderful thing it was to have Holocaust survivors and some of the people who helped them survive share their memories with us. And for us to be able to preserve those memories so that even many years from now, people will know the evil that these survivors faced and the people who helped them get through it.
As we did this work together, one of the clear lessons that good leaders also must know is that what matters in life is not intentions, whether good or bad, but action.
Well, both Jewish and Christian sources affirm this.
As Shmuel, one of the early Talmudic rabbis, taught, there is no merit but in action.
And as the book of James in the New Testament says, faith without works is dead. And it's the action, the works, not the good intentions that produce results.
In one of the stories in our book, for instance, Jerry Koenig's father made a business deal with a farmer. Hide and save my family, and I'll give you my 60-acre farm when the war is over. Not much altruistic about that, but as time went on, the Koenig family and the Gurov family became friends.
What mattered in the end, what mattered was not whether it was a business deal or a great moral act. What mattered was that Mr. Gurov acted, and in acting, he saved 11 people, including Jerry. And because Jerry lived, his two daughters, who both live in the Kansas City area, by the way, and other relatives live today. And who knows how many other people are alive today because those 11 lived.
That's why the Talmud says that to save even one single life is to save the entire world.
And that's what non-Jews who saved Jews in the Holocaust have done. Even if there were not many such non-Jews, and even if they failed to save 2/3 of the Jews of Europe who perished at the hands of the German death machine.
Remembering that there were such rescuers is important for many reasons, not the least of which is that it gives us a chance to say something important about memory and the importance of action, of taking action when disaster strikes. Judaism recognizes that our lives are defined by two of the most mysterious moments we can comprehend, birth and death. Between those two, Judaism has created rituals for moments of transformation and transition that allow us to experience these moments to their fullest and allow us to create memories.
Indeed, in that way, Judaism and other faiths teach leaders the importance of ritual, of commemoration, of ceremony, to honor people who have taken action, who have been rescuers of institutional memory, who have contributed to the well-being of the whole organization, whether it's a business or a family. If ritual were not important, schools could just mail out diplomas.
One of the things that can happen when memory is short-circuited is that a chilling sense of absence can fill the air.
I recall writing a column from Poland when Jacuques and I went there to do interviews for the book. This photo, by the way, is of us when we visited the Treblinka death camp.
In the column Bill just mentioned, he talked about the pervasive sense of absence that can be felt all over that wounded country, which Bill called a land of strangled memory.
And this is what I wrote. Absence is an odd and melancholy concept to describe. It cries not only for what was, but also for what never was, but could have been. Absence means you cannot hear songs never sung, or read books never written, or wear shoes never cobbled. It is not simply about people who used to be here and aren't anymore. It's about people who were never born, never got a bar mitzvah, never went to school or got married, never had children or grandchildren of their own, never died of old age.
It is all those people who we mourn because the Holocaust took them. And it's all the people who survived the Holocaust, sometimes, like the people in our book, with help from non-Jews, who we celebrate because they have been creating memories to cherish, memories that help them understand who they are and whose they are.
As Jacuques and I worked on this book, I was struck by something I read in his first book called Accessible Judaism. He noted that Jewish history, quote, can't be discussed without reference to racism, bigotry, expulsion, torture, murder, pogroms, and genocide. However, he wrote, while these words carve out the saddest of memories, another enigma emerges. Is there any other minority, he asked, that has suffered so many threats to his existence and yet has managed to survive? Well, he mentioned the Chinese and the Hindus.
But then I wrote this. Most of the cultures that brutally diminished the Jewish population have long ceased to exist, like the Babylonians and Assyrians. All of the empires that tried to change the Jew into something he was not have vanished. Rome is just a city, Greece and Spain are just countries who are actually not doing very well financially either. Behooves them. The Jews have even survived the greatest crime history has ever witnessed. But the Jews are still around.
Understanding at least a small part of this history is why Jacques and I wrote this book. We wanted to preserve memory.
It's why Judaism's commitment to memory is so important. It's a crucial value that we as Jews want to give as a gift to the rest of mankind so that racism, bigotry, expulsion, torture, murder, pogroms, and genocide can end for Jews and for everyone else. It's why we Jews have been so insistent about recognizing the genocide happening today in Darfur. If anyone recognized genocide for what it is, it's the Jews.
Well, with that as some background, allow us now to give you just some highlights of some of the stories in our book and to tell you some of the leadership lessons we have drawn from those stories.
So for a moment, we'll go back to Jerry Koenig's story. And what's a major lesson here? It's this. Sometimes large, painful sacrifices must be made so that the enterprise can survive at all.
When a baby was born in the bunker where Jerry Koenig and 10 others were hiding in a barn, the decision was made to poison the child so its crying would not alert outsiders to the presence of the group. One died so 11 could live.
The economic crisis that began with the Lehman Brothers bankruptcy filing in September 2008 put all businesses and even non-profit organizations in America on notice that they needed long-term survival plans, and that such plans may well call for terrible sacrifices that had been unthinkable in earlier good times.
The immediate goal for many organizations entering this deep recession would be simple survival. Huge banks, insurance companies, and automobile manufacturers, once thought to be the unbreakable backbone of the American economy, suddenly had to make profoundly difficult choices just to keep breathing.
They would have been better prepared had they understood the flesh and blood decision made in the bunker of a barn in Poland during the Holocaust, a decision that saved 11 lives at the cost of the life of an infant girl.
There would have been room for this newborn girl with the 11 other Jews hiding under a barn floor in northeastern Poland, except for one thing. She did what all babies do. Jerry said she was crying, and really, he said, she had very good reason to cry, because she was being eaten alive by pests, the lice and the bed bugs that we had in the bunker. Of course, 11 souls, he said, depended on maintaining silence.
So, to try to save the 11 from the Germans, the child was fed a poison to silence her cries forever. Pega's daughter died so that Jerry Koenig might improve his chance of living, of surviving. And not just Jerry, but also his brother, their parents, and 7 others, including Fega herself, who was hiding in a barn owned by Jan Gural and his wife.
The people in the bunker thought about giving the infant to the girl's daughter-in-law, Kasia, to rear as her own. But when Kasia gave birth a few days earlier to a baby boy who died almost instantly, that birth was attended by a midwife from the nearby village of Kosoflaki. The swapping option would not fly, Jerry told us, because the midwife was involved and thus other villagers knew what had happened. So the decision was reached, he said, that the little girl was going to have to die. The farmer's wife came up with the method of poisoning her with opium from poppy seed pods. And Jerry told us the little baby went to sleep, never to wake up.
This death, quote, had a terrible effect on the people in the bunker, end of quote, Jerry told us. We really thought after this happened that somehow or another we are not going to make it. But we did.
No, of course it does not require intentional death to help businesses and nonprofits survive. But sometimes the sacrificial nature of what is required can feel like it.
Long-time, loyal employees must need to be let go. Contracts with reliable vendors who depend on your company may have to be radically changed or abrogated. Organizational structures may require profound alterations that heap tons of work on the remaining employees. Whole divisions may have to be jettisoned, and more.
But as companies go through such pain as organizations do, they must know two things. Any hope for the future, any hopes are utterly dependent on survival. And even if they do survive, they may have to reinvent themselves in ways not previously imagined. So along with the cost cutters and the restructuring experts, companies looking to the future after going through the valley of the shadow of death need to have someone whose job is to reimagine a new future in realistic ways.
After the war, members of the Koenig family had to give up everything familiar to them in Poland and find new futures in new lands. The family was forced to escape to Czechoslovakia, then to Austria, and eventually to the American zone in Germany, where they lived in displaced person camps.
Jerry returned to school and graduated from a Munich engineering institution in 1951, at which point the family got the necessary approval to immigrate to the United States.
So in just a few years, the Koenigs transitioned from a happy and pretty well-to-do family in Eastern Europe to a facing death daily family hiding in a barn to a destitute immigrant family that had and did shape a new future for itself.
With a willingness to be flexible and to move toward an uncertain future with hope, they made it, both because of and in spite of horrible decisions that had to be made just to survive at all.
There are several important leadership lessons in the next story we want to share with you from the book. The story of this man, Dr. Felix Zandman, one of the most remarkable men either one of us has ever met.
In an important sense, Felix survived because of gratitude. If we haven't built into our businesses and other organizations an appreciation of the important role gratitude can play, we're really missing the boat.
One day, some years before the war, a Catholic woman whom Felix's grandmother knew came to her to beg for help. She was near the end of a pregnancy, but was having a terrible time at home with an abusive and drunken husband.
So Grandma Tima took her in and arranged for her baby to be born at the Jewish hospital in Grodno, which was in Poland at the time the war broke out in 1939, but today is across the border in Belarus. Well, years later, when Felix was fleeing for his life from the German occupiers of Poland, he ran to the rural house where this same woman, Anna Pocholska, lived and asked her if she would hide him for just one night.
No, she said, not just for one night. God send you, and you'll stay with us until the war is over and you are safe.
So for 17 months, Anna hid Felix and 4 or 5 other people in a pit dug under the bedroom of her small house. This is a replica of that pit that is now on display at the National Liberty Museum in Philadelphia, near which is the headquarters of Vishay Intertechnology, the huge company that Felix founded after he escaped the pit, got his PhD at the Sorbonne in Paris, and came to America.
Felix Zandman would not have survived to invent electronic parts that make our cell phones, for instance, possible, had not his grandma Tema once done an act of kindness for Anna Puchalska, and had not Anna been grateful enough to have returned that act of kindness to Felix.
And because Felix and several others lived, his children and his grandchildren are alive today.
We interviewed Felix Zandman in Philadelphia, near his company corporate headquarters. And then we interviewed 2 of Anna Puchalska's daughters in Gdansk, Poland.
You should know that one way Felix continues to express gratitude for Anna and her children is by continuing to support these daughters and other family members in generous but appropriate ways.
Another lesson from the Zandman story is that you need consistent rules and consistent discipline, sometimes just to survive.
When Felix and several others began hiding in the pit, Zandman's uncle, who was there also, laid out clear rules for living together for an unknown amount of time.
What are the rules? First, because there was a young married couple in the pit, no sex. That would simply complicate everything. Second, because some places in the pit were more comfortable than others, more humid or more hot, everyone had to move every 2 or 3 hours. And
you can see someone sitting there on the chamber pot. A third rule had to do with food, which once a day was dropped down to the 5 or 6 people in the pit through a floor in the trap door under that bed where the boots and shoes are. The rule was that one family divided the food and the other family got first choice of which portion to take. The next day, those roles switched.
everyone agreed to these rules, and as a result, the people emerged from their hiding place 17 months later, still as friends.
Well, before we throw this open to some questions, let us share quickly a few more leadership lessons from our book.
First, know whom to trust. Then persevere no matter what.
That lesson is illustrated by the story of Maria da Vinci, whom some of you may know because she's from Kansas City. She survived under the floors of barns for 28 months because she knew someone who had proved his trustworthiness before the Holocaust began.
And once she survived, she was forced to start from scratch again and again until she finally became a well-to-do businesswoman, civic leader, and philanthropist here in Kansas City.
The next lesson, reality is different for each person. Your assumptions may not be shared by those closest to you.
This lesson is found in the story of Aaron Elster and his sister Irene Budkowski, who survived by being hidden in different parts of the same house for about 2 years. But the experiences of each were radically different. Only later did they come to understand what the other went through.
Next, sometimes help comes from unexpected sources. You will miss it if you are not open to being surprised.
You can learn that lesson from the story of Barbara Turkertaub from Akron and her younger sister, who were saved by a Catholic priest in a convent full of nuns, people who represent a faith that had oppressed her people, my people, historically.
A final lesson to leave with you from the book is this: always have an escape plan, an exit strategy.
This lesson is best learned from the story of Ziggy Allwise, who used a small knife he had in his pocket to cut through a canvas covering the back of a truck, taking him and others to their death and burial in a mass grave. And he was willing to use it when the only alternative was death.
There are many more stories and lessons we could tell you from the book, but if we tell all of them to you, you'll have no reason to buy it. And because all of the royalties from the book will go to Holocaust-related charities, we modestly hope that you'll just buy a dozen copies a week for the rest of your life and feel good about that.
So we have come here to speak of memory, of gratitude, of life lessons, and to say to you, as we also have said to ourselves, that if we lose all that, we lose hope and any possibility of a future brighter than our past.
Well, one way not to lose all of that is to use the reader's guide at the end of the book. It will help you, through questions, confront some of the difficult moral and ethical issues that these stories raise for us.
Thank you for your kind attention, and now we're open to answering some of your questions.
Right, but I don't want any about Winston Churchill, please. What can we answer for you?
Silence is not an answer. It's not a question either.
Yeah.
Where do you think we go as a society here to help those who are perhaps invisible or in needing our help now? I mean, we have a society where there's so many services, but so much need. How does an individual choose what to do?
Well, one of the ways that question gets answered is not only by the people you know, but what your passions are. Clearly, if you just look at your mail each week, you get 50 to 100, at least it seems like that to me, invitations to spend your money on this group and that group. And I have found for me that I need to find an outlet for my charitable instincts by following what my passions are. And so I seek to do that. But it's also, it seems to me, important when we think about how to relate to the rest of our culture and people who are in need, is that we need to know these people personally in some way. It all changes when you look them in the eye. And if we, like the Jews who survived in our book, if we don't have people outside of our immediate circle, outside our racial circle, outside our ethnic circle, our religious circle, our economic circle, we end up thinking, objectivizing those people. We end up thinking of them as not truly human in some way. And it may be that those are the very people who will end up saving us from something.
Well, I would tackle it looking at the angle of empathy. Just recently, I watched a film, I think it was on HBO, about Temple Grandin, how she created a better system of killing cows by walking the same path that the cows walk and figure out what the cows see. The difference between, well, in Temple Grandin's case is that she, unlike the cow who can do nothing about it because she's powerless, because she's, first of all, she's a cow, and second, never been, taught what to do, or doesn't, even if a cow knew what to do, cow can communicate. Temple Grandin could walk the walk, understand what the cow feels, and then solve that problem. And I think, many, many times I have thought that if doctors were to just sit in a hospital room and have to wear that horrible gown that leaves your behind open, it would be a very humbling experience.
Yeah, there was a movie about that. I think it was called The Doctor. The Doctor.
Really?
Yeah. William Hurt discovers what it's like to be a patient. So it's. Valerie.
I just wondered how you came up with the title for the book.
Good question. The title actually has several meanings, but the words themselves came from a rescuer whom we interviewed in Poland. We said to her, she was part of a family that had helped to save Anna Schiff, who's in the book. And she was a teenager at the time, but the decision to save a Jewish woman was made by her parents. And we said, why did they do this? Why did they put themselves at risk? And why did they save Jews? And she said, they were just people. She was referring not only to her parents, but more to the Jews whom they saved. But we have come to feel there are several meanings
Right.
to it.
One of them is that they were, it depends where you put the focus. If you put on just, that the people who did rescuing were just, righteous people. That's one angle.
Justice.
For justice, for righteousness. The other angle would be that they, is the one that Bill said, they, why did you save them? Because they're just people like me and you. And this is also very, very important to understand that the people who did the rescuing, other than maybe Irina Sandler or people like that, were regular people. It didn't require to be Superman. It didn't require to be very rich or very connected with the Nazis or to live in the city or in the fields. Anybody who wanted to do the effort of rescuing somebody could have done it. Some paid a very high price, but still they were just people, which I think tells us that, when we go there and we, in our businesses, in our lives, we have the ability, maybe if not to solve everybody's problems in their whole lives, at least to ameliorate their situation a little for today. And finally, we had one case of a guy.
He's talking about the were phrase now.
Yeah,
Word.
were, yes. Where a fellow who, I don't know what words one uses in academia for people like him. Scumbag, perhaps, is a good one.
That's a kind of technical term.
A technical term. This man is, nasty, self-centered, horrible. I mean, one of the nastiest people I have ever encountered. And we went to interview him because him, with his family, helped hide a certain woman. And the story is, start from the beginning. We interviewed a woman in Houston. And she was lovely. And then all the time we're asking, are the people who rescue you, are they still alive? Are you in touch with them? And she was very uncomfortable and saying, well, I think he's alive. I think he lives in Gdansk. But I really don't want to have too much contact with him. And I was horrified. I say, what could this man have possibly done to you that you wouldn't give him everything he wants? I mean, I contend that the Jews who are saved by non-Jews have what I deem to be an endless debt. There's nothing they could ask you shouldn't do for them. A kidney, a cornea, anything. Sky's the limit. But this woman was particularly concerned about money. She said, I don't want him to come after me for money. Okay, so...
It was all I could do. I had to hold Jacques back from hitting this woman.
Right. Like a woman old enough to be my grandmother, I still was ready to give her a good... So we decide, we were just curious. And we promised her we're not going to betray her trust. And we didn't. Through devious means, he sounds very serious, but he's very devious. We get to Paul. We find this guy. We contact him. We never told him about the woman being alive in Houston. But we begin talking to him, and he was really a horrible human being. Totally focused on, well, they did wrong to me. They went to America. They became rich. They never gave me enough money. Okay. At the end of the interview, every time we did an interview, not as a payment, and no payment was promised or offered, but at the end we'll take an envelope from our pockets with $100 or 300 zloty, whatever the equivalent, and give to the person, not as a payment, just as a token of our gratitude.
They cover their costs of coming to see us in a taxi, that sort of thing.
And take his wife maybe for dinner, wherever, if she can put up with him. But anyway, so everybody was very gracious. This man said, and I quote, "You cannot buy me with that kind of money." That kind of money means put another zero, we're talking. So the man was very disagreeable, and it became obvious to me that this guy did something great then. He has become somebody not very nice, but that still doesn't take away from what he did. And that woman is alive in Houston today, and her family, because of him and his family. So there's another meaning. And
there's also a man in our book whose family rescued Jews who today, in the Krakow area, has fallen back into the anti-Semitism that has been so prominent in Poland. There is a radio station run by a renegade Catholic priest in Poland called Radio Maria, which just spews anti-Semitic trash. And this guy has sort of gotten sucked into that. So after we interviewed him, after he approved the story and so on, we tried to send him something else, and we're told by the people at the Galicia Jewish Museum who helped set all this up, just forget about him. He's fallen off the anti-Semitic edge of the world. And so he helped to save Jews, and now he's somebody else. They were just people. That was a long answer to an interesting, short question. Yeah.
One question I always have as a parent is that how do you teach your kid to be, what I think the phrase is, to be tolerant, to be acceptable of other cultures, to be acceptable of people who don't look like him or her? Because, again, you might argue, or we may not argue, that the issue of racism, so to speak, or intolerance has changed from half a century ago when these atrocities happened. And we are facing with new barriers, socioeconomic barriers and cultural barriers. So when you looked into the lives of these people, and the ones who were brave enough and courageous enough to do those acts of support to the other human beings, is there a conclusion in how they were brought up in their family,
Wow.
and we could maybe duplicate that or get lessons from it, because at some point we got to break this vicious circle.
Well, you know,
What are the tips for parents, so to speak?
what I think we found, even though it's very difficult to come up with one hard and fast rule, you know, but generally speaking, people are much more likely to help, at least as the first person being helped. If later they end up bringing more people in, the dynamic changes, but the first person being helped be somebody they knew from before. They had a business relationship. You know, I'll tell you this. My family in Poland were Hasidic Jews and rabbis for 600 years. And Hasidic Jews had a much, much harder time being rescued. We, in fact, tried to find a Hasidic Jew that had survived. I'm not saying they didn't exist. We just didn't find them. Why? Because they lived such an insular lifestyle that was only about Jews. They had no contacts with the outside world. That when the time of need came, they didn't know anybody they could ask such a huge thing. So people, the first Jew people would hide would always be, generally speaking, and I cannot think of any case that's different.
A friend.
But a friend.
Yeah.
If later, once he was already involved in it and somebody knocks at the door in the middle of the night, it's another Jew, by now he figures, I have nothing to lose. If I save one, I save two, I save 17. But the first one would always be a friend. So I think it's one of the lessons we discuss in the back of the book is if we don't know people outside our immediate circles of religion, socioeconomics, etc., what does that say about us?
And I think we, as parents, we have to model this. We can't just talk about it. My mother used to say, clean your plate, there are children starving in India. Well, when I was 11 years old, she dragged my butt to India. We lived there for 2 years, and I saw these kids starving there. And it was a way of, my dad was over there as part of a University of Illinois ag team, so we were called to do that, but it was a way of making that lesson real. So in our family, we have become a family that seems not to have racial barriers. One of my sisters is married to a Japanese American who was born in one of the concentration camps in Arizona. One of their children is married to a Korean American. I have a niece who's married to a Filipino American, a niece who's married to a Chinese American, a niece who's married to an African American. We get together, we look like the Security Council. And it's that ethic that my parents taught us by living it. And I think that is the model, and that's often what happened with these people. The parents were friends of Jews, and so when it came time to do what was right, you did what was right for your friends, not because he was Jewish, but because he was in trouble. What else can we tell you about this project? We worked on this book about 4.5 years, and most of our travel was done in 2007. Jacques and I pinballed around this country, lots of places. We have people in the book from Chicago and Detroit and Cleveland and Canton and New York and Washington and so on. I went to all those places at least once, if not more, and then we spent time in Poland doing interviews. But it was interesting that Jacques had gone to Poland for the first time in 2004, I think. And, well, you tell the story.
So basically, I went first time to Poland in 2004. And I had heard already about Irina Sandler, and I was fascinated by her. I mean, I assume people know who she was. She's a woman who, working together with something called Jacuques, which was a Jewish division of the Polish underground. There's only 2 countries in Europe that had Jewish divisions in their underground meant to save their Jewish citizens, France and Poland. And working in Jacuques, she helped steal, take away, and hide 2,500 Jewish babies from the Warsaw Ghetto, and then placed them with friendly families around Poland. And she kept the list hidden in a jar. She would put in little jars and then bury them in her backyard. And there was a play done by kids here from
Near Fort Scott.
Kansas, called Life on a Jar. And I wanted to meet this woman, and I can be fairly persuasive when I want something. So I did it, and I came back, and she was truly, I'm a Jew, so I'm not supposed to believe in saints. But she was very saintly. And I was very impressed, and I wonder how many more stories are like that. And it wouldn't be interesting to tell them. And as I like to say, I came back. I was looking for a really good writer to help me write this. I couldn't find one, so then I called Bill.
See what I put up with.
And then, it has been, I think as a rabbi, and I'm sure Bill would second that as a journalist, you get opportunities to meet very cool people, very interesting people, in my case, I don't know, the King of Morocco or Elie Wiesel, but nothing was, for me personally, as interesting as meeting these people who, survivors and rescuers and rescuees. It was really fascinating.
What intrigued me is we look back on our experience, and it turns out that Jacques, as the Jew, was interested in the non-Jewish, usually Catholic is what that meant. He was interested in the Christians, and I, as a Christian, was interested in the Jewish survivors more. He had grown up around Holocaust survivors, and they were.
Dime a dozen back where I came from.
He can say that, I can't. But I was much more intrigued by the stories of those who survived and how they did it, and the fact that to survive the Holocaust was often and usually a matter simply of chance and of luck. When 6 million people out of 9 million die, you can't have much of a strategy to get through it. Any strategy is overwhelmed by the scope of what the Nazi regime was doing in Europe. And the fact that these people survived is, you can count it as a miracle, you can count it as luck, you can count it as ingenuity. They certainly use their ingenuity, and that's why the term rescuer, which is often used to describe the non-Jews who saved Jews, is a problematic term. It sounds like the Jews did nothing to save themselves, like they were passive. No, not so. You remember the Ziggy Allweiss story. Boy, if you're ever in trouble, you want Ziggy on your side. This is a tough guy. And he always was figuring the odds and doing what he had to do, and cut his way out of a truck, taking him to his mass burial. So they were much more active than the term rescuer might imply.
Unless, obviously, we're talking about babies.
Right.
Or children, But,
Yeah.
all right.
What else? Yes. We created a research fund through the Midwest Center for Holocaust Education here in Kansas City, and we raised the funds ourselves. We went out to friends and local foundations and just individuals and said,
members of the New Reform Temple, every one of them got a begging letter.
And members of Second Presbyterian Church, where I belong, and we said, please help us with this. And we raised enough to be able to do the research. But even so, we have a fair amount personally invested in this process. And but as I say, we think it's right to give the royalties away to Holocaust-related charities, particularly the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous in New York, which is an agency that provides financial support for the non-Jews who help to save Jews. And there are well over 1,000 of these people in Eastern Europe that the Jewish Foundation for the Righteous supports. And there's a short chapter in the back of the book that describes the work of JFR. So, yeah.
Well, you've
it because I wondered how a rabbi and a columnist got together. So you actually went
Well,
out and found this guy. Huh?
You know, after Jacques came back from Poland, he called me and said, you know, I'd really like you to help me with this. And I said, you know what, I'd love to do that, but to do that, I'm going to have to retire. And he said, so do it. So I did.
Then, interestingly enough, he was still retired and writing the same amount of columns and words every week to the paper. Shows you how hard he worked when he was active.
I actually took formal retirement from the Star in mid-06, but I continued to write the weekly faith section column on a freelance basis until a year ago, November, when in the midst of all these staff and budget cuts at the Star, they came to me and said, no matter how little we're paying you, we can't afford to pay you that anymore, so your column's dead. I still write a daily blog that the Star features on its website. You can find it under the list of Star blogs. And I write a column for the Presbyterian Outlook, a national publication that covers my denomination. And as of last week, I've agreed to write a biweekly column for the National Catholic Reporter. Its online edition particularly, which is NCR is based here in Kansas City and is kind of a progressive voice of Catholicism. So with that and 6 grandkids in town, I don't lack for things to do, for sure.
And he gets at least one call a day from me.
At least, yes. Yeah.
I'm interested in the, it's called Rescuer, that returned to his anti-Semitism. And I remember my daughter going on March of the Living to Poland and having, and of course they're very visible as a Jewish population arriving in Poland, and having teenagers, kind of maybe 20-year-olds, saluting Heil Hitler to them. And so I'm really, I was almost say intrigued by that return.
One of the, I think it helps to understand the scope of what we're talking about here. At the time of World War II, September of 1939, there were almost 3.5 million Jews living in Poland. More Jews there than any country anywhere. By the end of the war, more than 90% of them had perished in the Holocaust. So there were maybe 300,000 or so left in Poland. A year after the war ended, in July of '46, there was a pogrom in Kielce, where local villagers killed about 40-some Jews. And the rest of the Jews who had survived and were still in Poland looked around and said, my God, it's not even safe yet. We got to get out of here. And most of them disappeared. And later, those who were still around in the 60s, under the Soviets, there was an anti-Jewish pogrom that went on. And so most disappeared at that point. Today, there are maybe 20,000 people in Poland who would identify themselves as Jews. I think the country has a well-deserved reputation for anti-Semitism, but the younger generation, I think, is getting over that. The problem is that they are not able to do much of what we just said you need to do, that is to look them in the eye, to live with people, to understand them because of so few Jews left. But the interesting thing about being in Poland today is that there is a vibrant Jewish culture. It's just done by non-Jews for non-Jews. There are restaurants, there are Jewish festivals, there's a college or university in Lublin.
Right, in Lublin there is a department, an Yiddish language department at the Lublin University where professor, her first name is Monika. Polish last names are very complicated. not easy like Cukierkorn. Anyway, so,
or Tammeus,
which is a Polish name. Anyway, but Professor Monika teaches Yiddish, is non-Jewish, teaches Yiddish to non-Jewish students who then congregate and created a theater troupe that performs Yiddish plays in Yiddish to an all-Gentile audience in Lublin. And I think this, I would answer you that there's 2 sides of this issue, because on one hand, the so-called anti-Semitism, or I think it really is a way for young disenfranchised people to show their dissatisfaction, because any thinking Pole would know that there's nothing, forget the Jews, leave the Jews aside, leave the Jews off the equation. there's nothing positive to be said about Hitler vis-a-vis Poland. Nothing good came or would have come had the war lasted longer to Polish non-Jews had Hitler won. Okay? So, and the flip side of it is that there is a longing for this Jewish population because they understand that the Jews are a reminder of a better, gentler Poland, and Poland was a much better place. If they thought it was bad with Jews, how much worse it is now without Jews. And I have lots of books and pictures. Specifically, I remember one place where what would happen was the Jews would come in and they would create the market. Why? Because they were good at buying and selling. They were good at going 300 miles that way to find the kind of cheese that you didn't have here to bring and sell. So the local merchants felt, I'm sure they felt all of them, look, the Jews are doing all the business. Let's get rid of the Jews. We're going to have all the business. Not understand, and then you look at those pictures of what's called a Rinek, a main square of a town, and it's full of carts and horses and people buying and selling. Those are Jews. And the people of the villages of the town are buying and selling, and everybody's doing business. You remove the Jews, it doesn't happen that the buying and selling is being done by Gentiles. There's no more buying and selling. I have been to villages where I have looked at the picture of 1935, and it's lively, and you look at today, it's decrepit. It's exactly the same window that was a little broken in this house in this corner. It's still there, because nobody has bothered to fix it. But what is missing there is there was Bill's article that the Jews are not there anymore. So the economic activity hasn't improved for non-Jews, has actually gotten worse.
We Gentiles just buy, is that what you're saying?
No, you sell also. Just, I'll explain to you later how that works.
Good. A last question?
In your book, what other rescuers from other religions other than Christianity, Catholicism, did you find, if any?
Not in our book. We don't have, except people who would describe themselves as former Catholics or secular Catholics who are simply not active in the faith. Poland was a predominantly Catholic country. But there are examples, and someone did a book about a year or two ago of Muslims in, I think, Albania saving Jews. But for the most part, the people in Europe who saved Jews were either Christian or from a Christian context, whether they were active in that faith or not.
And just what makes our book unique in relationship to your question is that we chose to focus only on Poland. Had we gone to places like Serbia or Albania or wherever, then there would have been diversity because there are documented cases, as Bill says in a book, of Muslims who hid their Jewish friends and colleagues.
Yeah. We really thank you for your attention today. We've enjoyed being able to share this with you. We will be out in the hallway once we leave and have some books for sale. They're $25, and as we say, all the royalties will go to Holocaust-related charities. And there is a website for the book called theywere.justpeople.com and a Facebook page. Just search for They Were Just People and join in some of the conversation that we're trying to raise up because of what we've done here. Thank you.